Story 1. Please don't let my son work for this man. When I was 15 years old, my dad suddenly passed away. He was only 45. They said he had a heart attack while working on his boss's, Mr. Oliveira, house. He had worked there his whole life, taking after his father's duties when he died of heart problems. When we heard what happened to my father, my mother cried her eyes out, but my grandma, his mother, broke down crying, sobbing, worse than my mother. I have never seen anyone cry like that. It was so desperate. I don't even have the words to describe it, but it was her son, the only child she had left. My mother fell into a massive depression, but my grandmother, she was never the same. She had a weird look in her eyes, not only sadness, but also guilt. She never spoke about it, but you could feel that she felt responsible for what happened to my father. I tried talking to her about it one time, but as soon as mentioned that guilt in her eyes, she slapped me so hard I fell backwards. I was in shock. My grandma never even yelled at me, let alone hit me. She instantly broke down crying again, sobbing. Despite what happened, I hugged her, comforted her. I couldn't even imagine her pain, and how could I be so insensitive to even talk about this with her? Saying that she felt guilty of her son's death. I could never forgive myself. A few weeks after what happened, Mr. Oliveira visited us. Well, he visited me. My mother and grandma were out. He knew we were struggling to make ends meet, despite his help paying for the funeral. He offered me a job. It felt a little odd, offering a job to a 15-year-old that required to drop out of school. It felt even weirder when I remembered that the same happened to my father decades ago. I accepted, without speaking to anyone first. We barely had food, our bills were piling up. We were on verge of getting evicted. When my mother and grandmother got home, I told them the news, with a smile on my face. I talked about how I could make them safe now, how I could make sure they wouldn't have to worry about food anymore. My mother, crying, didn't say anything besides she wished things could be different. That she wished I could be a normal kid, go to school, graduate. I thought she would be fuming, but she just thanked me, gave me a tight hug, and went to her bedroom. My grandmother, on the other hand, was bawling her eyes out, mumbling. She dropped to her knees, begging me to not do that. She begged and begged, said we could find another way. She said I couldn't do this. When I asked why, she got silent. I didn't push too much. She had a lot on her plate. After that, every time I saw her, she would just cry and cry and cry. She would cry, rocking her chair while staring at me, but it felt like she wasn't even looking at me, just gazing at something else behind me. After I started working for Mr. Oliveira, she stopped crying. She stopped even talking. She just had this weird look in her face. It was like she feared something all the time. It felt like her eyes were empty, if that makes any sense. She passed away a couple of months later. Mr. Oliveira took care of all the funeral costs. My mother, my loved mother, Amber, fell ill a few years later. They said she had dementia. I tried caring for her the best I could, but it was so hard. The emotional, mental, and physical toll it took on me was too much. Mr. Oliveira was a lifesaver. He paid for the best care money could afford for her. He would even visit her every other day. He was a blessing in our lives. Unfortunately, a few years later, my mother passed away. I got a box of her stuff. Everything she owned fit in a box. How could a person's life fit in a box? Someone who had a life. Had parents, siblings, friends, lovers, kids. Decades of life in a box. I never even opened it, just put it away at my house and forgot about it. I had no one. I was alone. I was lost. When I went to Mr. Oliveira to hand him my resignation letter, he didn't even give me the chance to speak. He just hugged me, held me there without saying a word. I broke down. I sobbed and cried. I told him I was alone. I had no family left, no friends, no one. He looked into my eyes and said I would always have him by my side, that I was family to him. That same night, I lit that letter on fire and never spoke to him about it. Not that much time later, I met Janet. Janet was Mr. Oliveira's niece. It was love at first sight for me. She was beautiful, smart, caring. She had long, soft, dark hair, beautiful brown eyes, a little shorter than me. She was everything I could ever want and more. I thought I had no chance. She came from a ridiculously wealthy family. Why would she even bat an eye at someone like me? Her employee. But she did. She came to talk to me every day. She made the first move. She invited me to our first date. She kissed me first, and despite my fears, she was the one who told Mr. Oliveira. And when he called me to his office, I was ready to get fired on the spot. As soon as I opened his door, I started vomiting words like sorry and apologize and disappointment. Told him I was so sorry for disappointing him, for going behind his back like that, for not warning him first, after all he did for my family. He got up, got his Macallan bottle, 2 glasses, and 2 cigars. That night, he drank with me. We smoked a cigar together on his office while he talked about how happy he was that his niece chose me to be with her, how he felt relieved, how she couldn't have a better person on his side. Mr. Oliveira was like a father to me, and to have his blessing was just incredible. He paid for our wedding. He paid for our honeymoon in Europe. He was always there for us, for both of us. I never asked for his money or gifts. I tried to refuse every time, but he insisted on paying. It were his gifts to us, as he said. I was so grateful to this man. I was only 30 when we had our first one, John, and a few years later at 35 we had Amanda. They were my pride and joy. I loved them like I have never loved someone. The way they would come running at me when I got back from work every day, screaming, "Daddy! Daddy!" The drawings they would leave for me, the gifts they made at school. I loved them both so much. When Amanda was 10, she went missing. Janet and I had called a nanny so we could go out for a date night. When we got home, the nanny was sleeping on the couch. John was in his bed, but Amanda, she was just gone. Mr. Oliveira went all out, paid the best investigators, made sure the police didn't drop the case, even after months of search, due to his impressive network with the higher-ups. But we never found her. My world fell apart. Janet couldn't even look at me anymore. She cried all the time, but whenever I tried to speak with her, she would shut me down. She even neglected John, never had time for him, barely spoke to him. I tried to be there for her, for him, for both of them. But I couldn't talk to my wife. My son was so sad about what happened with his sister, how his mother was treating him, that he barely spoke. I had failed. As a father, as a husband. However, I held tight. I still had to at least put food on the table for them. I didn't know how to make everything normal, or at least as normal as possible. That's when I remembered that my grandmother had gone through this, losing a child far too early, and that she had some kind of journal. If I was lucky enough, it should be on my mom's stuff, since I knew that my mom cleaned up the house after my grandmother's passing. I went to the attic searching for it, and it was there. Lucky me. There she talked about the death of my grandfather. She talked about how sad was seeing my father giving up on his future to provide for them. She talked about how the family was never the same after Linda, her daughter, went missing. That happened just before my grandfather's passing. I never knew my father had a sister. No one ever told me that, not even my father. She wrote about how Mr. Oliveira took care of the funeral and how good he treated her son. However, she also wrote that, a couple of days before dying, my grandfather came home one day looking like he saw a ghost. He told her that he found out who, or rather what, Mr. Oliveira was. He started talking to her about how Mr. Oliveira's family had been employing our family for generations. He found out while repairing his desks, a book, a very thick and old book. He mentioned to her that what was written there couldn't be real, how it went back much longer than him or his father, how for generations our family worked for the Oliveiras, or at least he chose to believe that there were multiple Mr. Oliveiras, because someone couldn't live that long, right? How it all began when someone from our family, living in extreme poverty, found a job at that same manor. How that man lost his sister, how that man died at 45 of heart issues, how that man's son began working for Mr. Oliveira at 15 years old to provide for his family, how his father, my great-grandfather, got the same fate. He told my grandmother that how was it possible? How could have no one noticed that pattern before? How could he forget his own sister? She thought my grandfather lost it, that he was having some mental breakdown, didn't believe it at all. Then he died of heart issues at 45. Then my father started working for Mr. Oliveira at 15 years old. How her daughter went missing. How she thought that it was all a coincidence. But slowly, my father forgot his sister. No matter how much she tried talking to him, he could never remember her. How one day my father took her to a doctor because he thought that she was developing dementia or something. and how even she started forgetting about her daughter. The only proof she had was the entry she wrote on that some journal, but what if that wasn't even real? What if she was trying to cope with her husband's death and somehow imagined another tragedy to focus on? Then, she stopped writing for years, found a way to cope or something else, but she didn't write anymore. That's until her granddaughter Brianna went missing. Her granddaughter? My sister? But I don't have a sister. I can't have a sister. I have no memories of her. Nothing. That's when I felt the dread of realizing what could have happened, the dread of realizing my grandmother's reaction to my father's sudden death, her reaction to when I mentioned why she felt guilty about his death, the reaction she had when I started working for Mr. Oliveira. She felt guilty for not believing my grandfather. She felt guilty for letting this thing go on, whatever it is. My heart sank. It was true. It was all true. I am writing this, hoping that Janet can read this and not make the same mistake I did, hoping that she can get John out of this. I turned 45 a while ago. I can feel my chest hurting. I don't know how much longer I have before I can finish writing this. I am not even going to waste my time trying to call for help. My fate is set. I don't know what Mr. Oliveira is, but please, John, don't ever work for him. Story 2. I had been killed 3 times, in 3 different ways, on 3 consecutive days by 3 different men. I had been killed over and over again for the past 4 days. I couldn't tell whether this nightmare had only started happening 4 days ago or if it had been going on for much longer, and I'd just noticed it recently. 4 days ago, I lived my life as usual. Nothing strange had happened until I passed by a blond white man wearing a jumper. The man didn't seem unusual, and I didn't remember ever meeting him. However, as he walked past me, he suddenly pulled a gun from his jacket, pointed it at my face, and pulled the trigger. It happened so fast that I barely remember anything about it. I woke up the next morning with that memory vivid in my mind. It was just a nightmare, I told myself. But I was wrong. It wasn't. Later that day, as I went out to buy groceries, I passed a bald white man wearing a t-shirt and jeans. I'd never met him before. He looked nothing like the man in my dream. But they shared one thing in common. They both killed me. As he walked past me, he pulled a hammer from under his shirt and swung it toward the back of my head. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my room. No wounds, no blood, just the memory of 2 different men killing me in 2 different ways on 2 consecutive days. At first, I thought it was just a strange dream within a dream. But I was wrong. It wasn't. On the 3rd day, as I was about to get into my car, a young man appeared out of nowhere. He pulled a knife from under his clothes and stabbed me in the chest. I had been killed 3 times, in 3 different ways, on 3 consecutive days. Something strange was happening. On the 4th day, I decided to take control. I sneaked out of my house, careful and watchful. I was searching for any of the 3 men who had killed me. Lucky for me, I found one, the man with the hammer. I hid in an alley and waited for him to pass before grabbing him and dragging him into the shadows. I managed to knock him unconscious and tie him to a chair. When he woke up, it took hours of interrogation before he finally spoke. "If I were you, I wouldn't want to know," he said. He sighed, then continued his explanation. An explanation I never expected to hear and could barely believe. According to him, the town I lived in was an artificial town created in an underground facility called Crime Zone. The facility served one purpose, to provide a space where any crime could be committed legally. The facility had many levels, each dedicated to a specific crime. The first floor was for robbery, the second for assault, the third for rape, the fourth for murder, and so on. The deeper the level, the more horrifying the crimes. The reason for this facility? Human nature. No matter how good life seems, there's always a dark corner in the human mind. People commit crimes out of anger, lust, or worse. The facility was created to let people indulge their monstrous urges in a controlled environment, ensuring the outside world remained safe and free from crime. Outside the facility, any crime, even the smallest, was punishable by death. "Okay, say you're telling the truth," I shouted. "What about me? What about us, the people who live here? Are we just here to satisfy the twisted desires of others?" "That's the thing," he said. "You're not supposed to remember any of this." He paused. "This town is the 4th floor, the murder zone. You live your life day by day, remembering everything except the murders that happened to you. But somehow, you remember, he added. It seems like there's an error happening in your system. An error? I'm not a machine, I yelled. The man chuckled. Maybe not, but in a way, you are. You're an artificial human. Artificial human? That's ridiculous. I bleed just like anyone else. No, not androids. Artificial humans, he clarified. Like clones, but not exactly. You're not real. Stop wasting your time. Let the agents fix you, and everything will go back to normal. Before I could respond, I felt a sudden electric shock from behind. I fell forward, unable to move. My vision blurred and sounds became distant, but I could still hear bits of the conversation. What took you so long? I paid for this. The man shouted at two officers in military uniforms who had appeared to untie him. We apologize, one of them said. It looks like we need to run diagnostics on all artificial residents. It's sad, the first officer said, looking at me. His only purpose is to be killed, over and over, every single day. Yeah, and now with this kind of error happening to him, the second officer added, there's a risk he'll be recycled. Story 3. My family doesn't remember who I am. I've been stuck in my dorm all semester, trying to keep my head above water, clawing at my face in the middle of the night as I struggle to keep my eyes glued to my computer. When finals week finished, I was eager to get the hell out of there, but I didn't receive the homecoming I was expecting, and the reality of my new situation is slowly killing me inside. I flew home the week after Christmas. Carry-on in hand, I walked into the airport lobby, expecting to see my family waiting for me, anxious to greet me after months away, but nobody was there. I stood there awkwardly scanning the crowd of travelers, hoping to catch a glimpse of a familiar face. But the more I searched, the more disappointment built up in my chest. Clutching my phone, I stared at the screen, awaiting a text, a call, any sign that would let me know someone was coming. That sign never came. It'd been about 30 minutes after deboarding when I decided to call my dad, but his number went straight to voicemail. It was odd. My dad never had his phone off. I called my mom, and after a few rings, the pre-recorded message played from the other end. The robotic voice filled me with sadness, the tone disingenuous and cold. We're sorry, Amber, can't come to the phone right now. Knowing that they would eventually call back, I took a seat in the waiting area. An hour came and went, and I was still awaiting their call. I tried Dad's phone again and perked up when the line actually rang this time. 3 rings later, my dad's throaty voice came through the speaker. Hello? Did you forget something? I said, annoyed. There was a pause as I heard my dad's breathing distance itself from his phone. I pictured him playfully looking at the screen, feigning confusion. His breathing returned to the speaker, and I patiently awaited the punchline. I rolled my eyes when it came. I'm sorry. Who is this? I should have known this was one of his pranks and huffed my frustration through the call. I'm at the airport. Are you coming to get me? A second pause came, this time lingering, fermenting in the palpable tension. I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number. He's never known when to end a ruse. Dad. The third pause was just as long and only ended when I heard the jingle telling me that the call had ended. I was stunned. The lengths this man would go to just to play his little game. When I called back, the line rang, but he didn't answer. I'm sorry, Nur can't come to the phone. I angrily ended the call and dialed again. Once again, the robotic voice greeted me instantly. I'm sorry. I was fuming. The Uber ride home was not a happy endeavor. A scowl plastered on my face the whole time as the views of town felt sour under the ridiculous circumstances. As soon as I walked through the door, my dad would be on the floor laughing his ass off at the minor inconvenience he caused me. It would be the highlight of his week. The car came to a stop outside our house, the familiar lettering on the mailbox bringing slight relief in the shitstorm that was my life. I was finally home. Luggage in hand, I walked up to the door and gripped the knob, but when I tried turning it, it wouldn't budge. It was the last thing I needed. My fury spilled out through my knuckles as I bashed my hand on the door. Dad? Open the door. I'm here. There was movement in the window, the curtains swaying behind the blinds. Someone was watching me from the other side. I waved and the blinds fluttered closed. They were really outdoing themselves this time. Footsteps walked across the floor on the other side of the walls and stopped just on the opposite end of the door. The knob unlatched, and the door swayed on its hinges, letting out an anguished creak. Someone was peering out of the small crack, their gaze dismissive and cold. "Hi, how can I help you?" I was clenching my fists, the joints in my hands snapping under the pressure. "Ha, very funny," I said as I touched the door and tried pushing it aside. My dad's eyes panicked as the door pushed against his hands, and he fought my push with one of equal strength. Wow. What the fuck do you think you're doing?" Taken aback by his sudden conviction, I cowered back, stepping off the welcome mat. I'd never heard my dad curse. He opened the door the rest of the way, revealing a wooden bat in his hand, his knuckles white with intent. His shoulders were stiff and hands shaky. He looked ready to use it, but the fear in his eyes hoped he wouldn't have to. "Dad?" I questioned. The quizzical look he gave me was gut-wrenching. "It's me, Maya, your daughter." My mom peered over his shoulder. "Honey, what's going on?" When her eyes met me, she yelped. Without breaking his connection with me, my dad answered her question. "This person says their name is Maya." He paused, still calculating the situation himself. "Our daughter." Horror washed over my mom's expression, and the words snagged in her throat. My dad finally glanced over at her, confirming the apparent absurdity of the situation. When their eyes returned, my dad raised the bat, shoving it in my chest. "Look, I don't know if you're crazy, having some kind of a psychotic breakdown, or just some stalker, but you are not Maya. You," disgust fluctuated his voice as he eyed me up and down, "are not my daughter." The prank had long outstayed its welcome, and I fought the awkwardness with a fragile giggle. But tears began forming in my eyes. Crackling emotion accompanied the words that left my mouth. "Mom, Dad, this isn't funny anymore." My dad bared his teeth, a primal display of anger, a premonition of violence. His jaw unlatched, and I saw the fury start to wallow up from his chest. But before he could say anything, a chilling voice drifted from inside the house. "Dad, what's going on?" She stepped up behind my mom, craning over both of them, trying to get a look at the spectacle at the door. A void formed in the center of my chest as I recognized the person standing behind my parents. It was me. It was like staring into a mirror. The blonde hair, glasses, eyes, mouth, tone of voice, an identical twin, a doppelganger, an imposter. Shock rang in my ears, and the world became distant, muted. It was as if a bomb had gone off beside me. I was woozy, fighting not to hyperventilate. The head of the bat pushed the air out of my lungs. "Hey, stop looking at her like that, you freak." I had been staring at the duplicate, but wasn't sure for how long. My mom cradled her baby in her arms, protecting the girl, protecting me from myself. My dad gently placed the bat under my chin and forced my face in his direction. "Look at me, you freak. If I see you around here or near my daughter again, I will take this bat and smash your head in. Do you hear me?" Too stunned to say anything, I just stared at him. The bat shoved me back a few feet. "Do you hear me?" He growled. My mom held him back. "Honey, that's enough." My dad lowered the bat, but kept it at the ready. "Now get the hell out of here before I call the cops." My mind sputtered, and my feet started moving. It was as if I was on autopilot, as if my body was protecting me from enduring more heartbreak. When I got to the sidewalk, the door slammed, and I was left out in the cold like a piece of trash. I wandered the street for a while, my luggage rolling behind me as I tried to figure out my next move and what the hell was going on. I eventually came across a corner store and shuffled my way inside. The clerk gave me a strange look as I walked through the door. I asked for the bathrooms, and he pointed me to the back of the store, eyeing me warily as I made my way in that direction. A woman was stepping out of one of the stalls as I walked inside and jolted when she saw me. I tried smiling at her, but she didn't return the gesture. She scurried out of the bathroom in a rush. I thought it was strange, but with so much going on, I put it out of my mind. That is until I walked up to the mirror and saw what everyone else saw. His beard was long, gray, and matted. The wrinkles on his face were deep, skin leathery. There was this smothered filth across his brows, as if he'd been standing near a coal fire all night. I reached for the glass and wiped at its surface, hoping the image would self-correct. When it didn't, I touched my face, The loose skin didn't bounce back as my fingers dragged across my cheeks. The warmth of my tears streaked down my face and soaked into the fibers of the man's beard in the mirror. The store clerk's reflection came into frame. "Sir, this is the women's bathroom. You can't be in here."